In the heart of a desolate country, where the sun barely touched the earth and thick fog clung to the hills like a permanent shadow, lay a small forgotten village named Clanmore. The villagers lived simple lives, working in the fields and tending to their animals. But there was an undercurrent of fear that hung over them like a dark cloud. Every house, every tree, and every stone was steeped in secrets too terrible to speak aloud, yet whispered in hushed tones when the moon was high and the wind carried the scent of something rotting. Among the villagers was a woman named Eliza, a widow with no children, but with a heart full of kindness. She lived alone in a small cottage near the edge of an ancient forest where few dared to tread. Her gentle ways earned her the love and respect of everyone in Clanmore. But her life, too, would be claimed by the village's dark past by something far more sinister than anyone could have ever imagined. One crisp autumn evening, the village fell silent as an unnatural fog rolled in from the depths of the woods. It was a fog that clung to the ground, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. It was on this very night that Eliza vanished. At first, her absence went unnoticed. The villagers assumed she had stayed in her cottage, resting by the fire as usual. But when the morning light broke through the fog and the sun failed to burn away the mist, something felt wrong. There was a feeling in the air, a sense of dread, as if something was waiting, lurking in the shadows. As hours passed and Eliza failed to show up at the village square, her absence was noted. A small group of villagers gathered to search for her, with little hope but a desperate need to find her. They combed the nearby fields and barns, but there was no sign of her. It wasn't until one of them ventured into the forest that the horror was revealed. They found her there, near the heart of the woods, her body mangled beyond recognition. But it was not just the dismemberment of her body that terrified them. It was the eerie calmness that surrounded the scene, the stillness that shouldn't have been there. The ground around her was soaked in blood, her limbs twisted at unnatural angles, as though some monstrous force had torn her apart with a savage hunger. Her face, however, was the most haunting, eyes wide open, frozen in a silent scream, as though she had died in the midst of unimaginable pain. There were strange markings on her skin, symbols no one in the village could decipher. But worse still, the ground beneath her seemed to pulse with a strange, unnatural energy. The villagers did not speak of what they had found in the woods. They buried Eliza quickly, hoping to put the incident behind them, but the unease never left. Strange things began to happen in Clanmore after that. People reported hearing whispers in the wind, voices carried by the trees. The fog seemed to grow thicker each passing day, and the nights grew colder, longer. At night, when the moon was full, people began to disappear. It started with small, unimportant things: chickens, a dog, a few sheep, but soon it escalated. 2 children went missing, then an elderly man who had wandered too far from his cottage. Every time a person vanished, the villagers grew more frantic, yet no one dared to speak of Eliza's death. They knew, deep in their hearts, that something was wrong, something had been unleashed, something they couldn't stop. David had just moved to Clanmore a few weeks before the first disappearance. A young man, restless and eager for a fresh start, he had been drawn to the village's charm and quiet solitude. But as the days wore on, he began to sense that all was not right. The people were friendly, but distant. They always looked over their shoulders as if afraid of something they couldn't name. One evening, after a long day of working in the fields, David wandered into the woods, curious about the village's strange history. The fog was thick that night, thicker than it had ever been. His footsteps crunched underfoot as he ventured deeper into the trees, where the light barely touched. The air grew cold, and the hairs on his neck stood on end. And then he saw it, a clearing deep in the forest, bathed in an eerie light. In the center of the clearing lay a large, ancient stone, covered in moss and twisted vines. As David approached, he felt the hairs on his neck prickle, a deep unease taking hold of him. It was here that he discovered the truth. The symbols that had been carved into Eliza's skin were etched into the stone. The same markings he now saw glowing faintly on the ground around him. The spirit of Eliza had never left the village. She had been torn apart, but her soul was not at rest. The curse that had claimed her body now sought vengeance, and it would not stop until the entire village had paid for its sins. David's breath caught in his throat as he heard a whisper on the wind, her voice, soft and broken, "Help me." Before he could react, the fog thickened, and something shifted in the shadows. A figure appeared, Eliza, or what was left of her. Her body was twisted, her skin stretched thin, and her eyes hollow with the hunger of something unnatural. She was no longer a woman, but a vengeful spirit driven by an insatiable hunger for revenge. David turned to run, but the fog was too thick, and the forest was disorienting. The whispers grew louder, echoing in his ears. He stumbled, falling to the ground as a cold hand touched his shoulder. When he looked up, Eliza's face was inches from his, her eyes wide and unblinking, filled with rage. "You should have left," she whispered, her voice like the wind howling through the trees. David knew then that there was no escaping the curse. Eliza was not alone. The spirits of those who had been consumed by the forest, the villagers who had disappeared, were all part of her vengeful army, twisted and hungry. And they would not stop until every soul in Clanmore had been claimed. As David felt his body being pulled into the ground, he heard one last whisper in the darkness. "She was dismembered alive and eaten, but now you will be too." This version expands the story to build tension, with a stronger introduction and deeper exploration of the eerie, supernatural elements. It's still a work in progress. If you want more details or changes, just let me know.